Welcome, Doug Place from Nando's, the Chief Marketing Officer. I'm very, very pleased to be able to have you on my Teams meeting today. Congratulations are, however, in order, Doug. I am in a position to share the delightful news that for the third successive year on our global but South African edition of BrandZ, you have received the communication award for the third year on the trot.
Delighted, relieved, and really what an honor to be recognized on a list of some pretty impressive brands that keep us up at night more than perhaps we would publicly admit. So what a privilege and an honor, and good to chat.
And I'm intrigued to hear how things are going in your COVID times, in your business in South Africa particularly, but around the world as well.
Sure. It's been a really interesting time. For the first time since Nando's opened its doors in 1987, we had to turn off the grills. And we in South Africa at least, and I'm lucky enough to look after the Nando's brand in about 13 different countries around the world, and by far the hardest lockdown was here in South Africa. Such that we couldn't trade at all for 3 months. So that's almost 100 days from turning the grills off to turning them back on, which is a really interesting marketing challenge. And we saw lots of other brands. If you can't sell the widgets, you might as well turn off the the widget making machine and turn off the marketing comms and all the things that go with it. And once we'd got through the initial terror of cash flow forecasting and all the things that go with that. And Nando's as a brand perhaps is famous for its advertising, but should be equally famous for the way in which it treats its people and its suppliers and its partners. And so the first port of call for us was to make sure that everyone was well looked after. So every Nando's employee was paid in full, in collaboration with the government UIF support for the full duration of that lockdown. We made sure all supply bills were paid and negotiated as sensibly as we could to make sure that there was going to be a Nando's at the end of the COVID tunnel. One of the unique challenges we have was how do we stay on people's radars? How do we as a brand partner with people in a really challenging and interesting and difficult turbulent time and not just disappear into the ether because we couldn't sell what they wanted to buy.
You talked briefly about communication in this period. Did you stop communicating? I mean, clearly you had one particular ad which indeed is featured around the world with the maybe turns out licking your fingers isn't so good.
I'd like to set the record straight on that particular piece of work, but because that was a response to KFC. It wasn't necessarily a provocation from our side, although it was interpreted as such. We'd seen that they had pulled the finger licking strapline from their US business. So we agreed and said, well, yeah, we agree. Perhaps now is not the time for finger licking good. Interpreted in far more shady, negative terms than perhaps we originally intended. But it had a lot of people talking. We changed the way we talked. I mean, we clearly weren't advertising, the Easter promo special. We couldn't cook it. But a lot of what we did was to do what Nando's frankly has done for almost 30 years, in fact 33 years now in September, which is we show up in people's lives in ways that people really appreciate. We don't want to interrupt them with messages that they don't care for. So we originally wanted to call it the COVID dictionary. But because of the limitations of certainly Twitter and Facebook cramping down fake news on COVID, anything that had COVID in it got locked away in a cupboard. So we called it lockdown lingo instead, and together with the help of South Africa, who, let me tell you, never fail to disappoint when it comes to seeing the lighter side of challenges. So we put together a little dictionary of terms, and so that was interesting. We did some interesting partnerships with the Solidarity Fund. We took a lot of our stock that was sitting in our restaurants and cooked it. We had special dispensation to cook that and distribute that to the needy, which then became installment 2 of our KFC and McDonald's tete-a-tete, which was, we then encouraged them to go ahead and do likewise and distribute their stock, which they went and did. So we launched the first ever streetwise peri-peri McBurger.
Are you planning some new fantastically topical campaigns coming out of COVID?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We've got a cracking idea that's in development at the moment. We never went away, and I think the COVID journey is going to be with us for quite some time still. A really fun campaign, as usual, inspired by Nzansi. which we hope to be bringing to screens very soon.
Are Nando's as well known around the world for their standout creative advertising?
It's well known for its creativity, and that's particularly expressed in South Africa, with an advertising frame of reference. Increasingly, it's not seen as advertising and more as, I suppose, it's a human side of the brand that people can relate to and talk to. It's not based on, say, the 30-second TV commercial like it is in South Africa, but as brand communications, it's certainly emboldened by the world we find ourselves in.
Coming back to your comms within South Africa, I've always been intrigued by how it is that you get triggered that this is a particularly topical idea that you can latch onto from a creative prospect. Does it come from you? Does it come from the ad agencies? Does it come from social media? Where do those wonderful ideas come from?
Thank you. That's incredibly flattering. We make a lot of things, and we'll talk about this in just a second, around when we don't get it right. And that does happen. The thing we're looking for really primarily is, is it interesting to people? So is this, is there enough attention in this particular topic? And the second, this is more important, is there a single view of it? So is this a particularly polarizing debate or isn't it? And what we're doing in our advertising is merely playing back to people things we've already heard. So it's not actually all that creative. We play it back in a way that is slick and it's smart and it's South African and it's funny. When it comes to more divisive topics, where it's not clear what the singular view is, we tend to take a swerve on that kind of a matter. We're looking for what do most people have in common? Where can everyone agree? And if you can do that in a way that's funny, it disarms the sensitivity that's can be associated with the heaviness of those topics. What Nando's does well is it shows up at all moments, not just big news headline moments as well.
Why is it you think that you are able to hit those buttons, whereas many of your competitors seem unable to be able to do so?
It was born, I think, out of how the Nando's brand was born. I mean, it started with very little resources and money in an industry that dominates the media landscape. I mean, fast food in particular is a high spend media category, and in order to stand out in the early days against big local giants, the likes of famous brands and Steers, as well as these incoming international brands in the forms of to some degree KFC and McDonald's. To stand out required creativity. It was the only game we could play, which has then created a degree of expectation that we continue to have really breakthrough standout creativity. In fact, the ads we are criticized about the most aren't the ones about polarizing topics or we didn't read the room right. The criticism we get that's most painful is it's dull or it's boring or we expected better from you.
We've always held that consistency is king, and I certainly believe that there is a look and feel about Nando's advertising, which has not changed.
It's always acted its age, I suppose, Nando's. So you talk about breast and thigh jokes, which were, very popular in the early 90s when we were, 10 years old. And now that we're to our 30s, perhaps we're a bit more responsible. The nature of the material changes, but the way in which it delivers and really resonates with people hopefully won't.